Hello, Curt.
Good morning, Dr. Brad. How are
Mhm.
you? It's Saturday, August 19th. This is a work. We're going to start with a chat and then roll into our working session. But
Excellent.
Brad is just commenting on how weird a week it is, and he wants to talk about Maui, which I think is a fascinating insight. Go ahead.
Well, it's like this. There's too many fires, and it lends to the narrative of climate change to those overly credulous souls amongst us,
Yes.
and it looks like arson.
Yes.
And then the fact of Maui was bizarre behavior by government agents,
Weird.
turning the water off, not letting cars exit the place, not
Um, oh,
turning the electricity off on the high power lines that were falling down. Just
not turning the sirens on because
yeah,
they're for tsunamis. What the fuck?
it's like just don't tell anybody and keep them in if they figure out there's a fire raging throughout their town. Good Lord.
Well, uh, we make fun of San Francisco, but we don't make it's the same problem in Hawaii.
What do you mean?
They have a governance problem in Hawaii because it's a very left-leaning place because of the admixture of different peoples there. So Hawaiian government is, you get government people in that government who that government attracts. And I'm listening to that guy talk yesterday, who the official in charge of setting off the sirens.
Right.
Listen to him say, well, we were afraid people would run. It's a tsunami. We use it for largely for tsunami warnings. So we're afraid people would run into the fire. So I'm like, well, you can't see a tsunami coming, but you can see the effing fire. Right. So I mean, and I was like, how do you rationalize this stupid shit in your head? When this stuff happens, you pull all the switches, right? You don't think about, you like, dude, we're gonna do everything possible. You turn off the electricity, you keep the water on, you turn on the fucking sirens, you saturate the phones and everything with messaging and say, look, this is really bad shit. The whole fucking
My
island.
associate tells me that my associate reports to me that a fire chief got badly burned, if not fatally, because they limited the availability of water due to the argument was we have to go ask the farmer about equity in the use of the water to get permission to turn it to use it against the fires that are destroying the town. Like what? And that's sort of believable that would happen in a ridiculously lendless nonsense place, right? But it's just
Well,
over
it's
the
'cause
top.
I mean, I say it all the time. The fundamental problem is we don't run war games, right? We don't have a militia. We don't have a civil militia. Basically, it's the same thing, which is that everybody who owns construction equipment, trucks, whatever, has something that they can do,
A
right?
role.
Can be called upon to stem an emergency. We've outsourced this to the FEMA, and they have no personnel and no budget. Right, so they can't actually do anything except talk. And then talk to governments who equally have no money, no budget, and no competency. So we've divested the population from the civil society at the militia defense, because
Yeah.
you need the militia to guard all these places once there's a disaster. You need the civil militia, which is that you need the people who go out there and restore and clean up the fucking disaster. Right? That's 2 F words I've used in this conversation so far, and we're only 10 minutes into it. And then we have the first responders, who really are, their job is their resources are constrained to the going concern. They're not capable of handling disasters. And those people, there should be somebody above that coordinating war games, making use of first responders the civil militia and the militia, it's the proper militia proper. And then you'd have a civil society. Everybody would be invested in the society. Everybody would have a role. It would be easy to account for everybody. But no, the government's going to create a nanny state that's going to take care of you, make you false promises, and fail hard every time. So exasperating.
Well, it kind of goes to this, the basic premise is that you test to failure. And
Yes.
this is tested to failure, and it failed. And it's like, okay, therefore, this will motivate change.
Right. Well, and what it changed, but so I would say that the government doesn't learn.
No,
And
the
so,
government has no real memory. It's like it doesn't have any predictive capacity at all.
so, and there's a problem. So one of the things I did in consulting business is I try to get people off the old-fashioned departmental
Yeah.
framework and work in projects and programs instead of departments. And so people have continuously rotating, adapting goals. So the organizations remain continuously rotating and adapting. All right. So you maintain anti-fragility in the organizations, right? And so when I run a company, I run it by projects. Now there might still be departments, right? So you have people with similar skills that can allocate work appropriately, just like you'd have carpenters and plumbers and electricians or whatever. And I might have marketers and technologists and advertisers and creatives and IT people and finance people and whatever, right? I mean, you have the whole, God forbid you have HR, but they do exist. So I use recruiting instead of HR. But anyway, so use this specifically to maintain continuous adaptability. And, Microsoft was very good at that, by the way. Microsoft doesn't do war games. They just reorganize around goals. They used to all the time, right? Which was the source of their adaptability back in the day. So, and you see this in the just-in-time movement. There's all sorts of variations, which is basically all bureaucratic organizations that are department run become self-serving and falsify. So you have to solve that underlying problem, which we know how to solve, and you can solve it both. You can solve it with markets, or you can solve it with projects and war games, but you can't solve it with bureaucracies. So I do it with project-based or mission-based, initiative-based work. And so that the goals of the organization are always changing, which makes it very difficult for individuals at any level to appropriate and capture the bureaucracy for their own interests, like has happened in everywhere we've allowed it to happen. So I was going somewhere with it, but I just had all these wonderful stories run through my head because I haven't had much coffee. Anyway, so in any event, that's what you want to get to. But if you're going to have, the very least we have to do is war games, because as you say, they not only don't they learn, they forget. And not only do they learn and forget, they capture. So it's why all these organizations are failing, is because they have objectives counter to the ones assigned to them by the polity. Whereas if, like we have these initiatives we want to fund, and the public said, I want these things, then you'd organize your thing to produce that outcome. You wouldn't, otherwise, what they do is they organize to predict the one they want. ATF shutting down 100 and some odd gun dealers yesterday. Really pissed
I did not hear that.
Yeah, so I mean, they have an agenda of their own making. They don't have an agenda of the public's making. So this is violating the fundamental principle in which the country is constructed. It's the government is organized to produce a market for us to decide. It is not organized to produce a government that decides for us. And the problem is you have a very noisy world when that happens. And some people don't want the noisy world. It's the cost of maintaining the defense of your own government from your own government is preserving the noisy world of political participation and all the shit that goes along with it. I mean, people pick on America all the time, but they don't see the value in the chaos.
Hmm.
And the only problem with the value in the chaos is the lack of decidability, which you and I and the team are providing, which is what's chaos from corrupt, what's the difference between chaos and corruption? In other words, what's the difference between learning and being a criminal? And the left is criminal, so they're not learning, right? They're imposing rather than resolving the market for us within the limits of sovereignty and reciprocity. Anyway, so yeah, I fucking ran with that one. I really didn't mean to. I was just trying to support your argument, and I sort of ran with that one very selfishly. But anyway, so now that I've finished my spiel, can we go back to you saying this is a very interesting
It's
week?
a very weird week.
And talking about Maui and how crazy it was.
Yeah, no, that was a good little rant, and Maui is still like the story has yet to come out. So there was another weird thing that's related to that is like the book that was relating the Maui fire to climate change that was available on Amazon during the fire, which is like that's ridiculously too fast. Like what does that make sense?
It's like, I mean, we always like to say, oh, it was this person that did this conspiracy thing. It's not. It's that a bunch of incentives accumulate so that a field of people might possess the incentive to bring this about. Now, you might have the incentive that's purely rational, which is the property developer wanting to buy up vast amounts of land. Right? You might have the opposite, which is the native wanting to get rid of a bunch of these people, right? You have I'm trying to paint a political
balance it out, right?
Right. And then you have the rebellious dickhead that likes the idea because it'll cause suffering as a means of his retaliation.
Right.
Against it. And you have in the middle the normal people are like, let's just not have this happen. But you have these three angles of incentive, which are profit, political activism and rebellion, all working together. And so, our tendency is to say, well, because we're humans, we always do this, we oversimplify, right? Because if we oversimplify, then we can organize to solve a single problem. But the reality is there's a field of potential malincentives out there. And the fact that the book exists doesn't necessarily have to be the cause. It's one of the fields of incentives manifesting.
Yeah.
That's why I say the conspiracy theory is like, well, we're just different in our definition of what is a conspiracy theory, right? I mean, I'm always like, well, I mean, you produce the incentives, people are going to follow them. Is it a conspiracy? Well, it's a conspiracy of common interest. I mean, the people don't have to agree. I mean, the property developer, the guy who wants to kick people off the native land, and the person who has just hatred of being left behind, right? Those people don't have a common interest in each other. They have opposing interests. What they have is a common interest in enacting a harmful change. So
right now the issue is this. I would say this in comment to what you said is that I did not mention that word conspiracy.
I didn't. Okay, I didn't think you were.
Well, I didn't. I'm just. It's for the audience and my own.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say.
It's like I never mentioned that, and it's like we agree. And so
I was thinking about, you were thinking about, this crazy stuff going on, and I'm thinking incentives, and I went from incentives to conspiracy of incentives to conspiracy, and I'm like, well, I mean, the developer could have just said, I'm just going to go for a walk and throw down some cigarette butts, and it's
who knows? It's like You just don't know, and you just go.
Right, you don't know.
But we agree. There's there incentives align a variety of perspectives on a similar potential outcome.
Mhm.
I agree with that. Well, there. This goes to the next thing. That's the other weird thing that I'm watching.
Okay, this is weird thing number 2 of the week.
This is really weird though, and it's like it's my perspective on the whole Leninist world we're living in the United States and Western civilization in general right now. And it looks like it's being set up for the rebound, which is the authoritarian nationalist outcome, which would make Trump the great white hope for the
That's why they're afraid of him, because they know it.
what?
That's why the enemy's afraid of him, because they know it.
I think they may be acting afraid of him. I don't know. I don't know how to, it's kind of like this. It's like, I could see it easily that they would suddenly support him and
Oh, I see. You mean that they would flip? No,
because it's just changed the diode because it's like, okay, that works.
no, because he's a clean house kind of guy. I mean, Trump is not a guy who works with scalpels and lasers. I mean, he's in the construction.
It's a crude implement. It's a D9, baby.
Yeah, he goes in there with fucking construction equipment and raises the damn field and then starts over anew and builds something better. It's what kind of guy he is. He's not. And the reason is he doesn't trust any of them. And they've proven that he can't trust them. Hell, we can't trust them. I mean, if I worked in, how do I say this without getting in trouble? I worked in a federal court, right? And was very left internally, right? But you can do your job anyway, right? You don't, I mean, that's your job, you're hired to do the job, you do the job. But that's because we're systematizers, right? We can separate, okay, well, this is bullshit, but my job is just this, and there's nothing immoral in what I do, right? From the people that made me crazy in the court were the people, all they thought about was how to get another day off, how to make better use of their expense account. I mean, it was all about what they could get out of the system. And I can't tolerate being around people like that at all.
No, they're offensive.
So I couldn't stand it. I wish I'd understood this about myself when I was younger, but I didn't. So wish you probably share. I wish I understood this. You understood this about yourself when you were certain things about yourself when you were younger. But
maybe. And I couldn't stand those people like that. Their focus is inappropriate.
Well, I mean, they get to some degree, the work gets done inefficiently, right? But it does get done. And for all the complaints I'll make about our justice system, which aren't exactly limited, it's still the best one.
Oh my.
I mean, it's like, okay.
Oh my. Best horse in the glue factory.
Yes, it's just, yeah, well, that's a good example, really, but it's still the best one. There's really no comparison because our system is the most Western of Western Civ. And we have not only the formal constitution and the systems and the sovereignty of the law instead of the parliament, but our constitution is freaking written down. So at least for the parts that aren't missing, it's pretty solid. So you maintain that, and the law in our country asks you to have a lot of responsibility. And if you can't bear that responsibility, it hurts you here. And we don't like to talk about it as fair. We talk about it as fair or unfair. It is fair, right? Our government policy may be unwise because it results in unfairness, exporting of labor and all this other crap.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't argue with American. It's very hard to argue with the American condition by arguing against the justice system. We can argue about our government and our political parties and the ideologies, and we can argue about the messiness and the trauma that it causes us to produce political experimentation, decision, adaptation, and change. But, you know, we live in a pretty good condition while it's all happening. It's just that most of us would rather not participate in the chaos.
Yeah.
But that's part of the gig, right? We get all these benefits because of that, because we don't hand over rule. You're thinking something. What are you thinking?
Got to circle back to my point here. It's like I have been advising to the beware of Weimar solutions.
So let's talk about what that means, because I'm not even clear on it.
It's like the statement on the social media is right-wing trope, I guess is a fair word. That is, Weimar problems breed Weimar solutions.
What I think you mean is that if you produce X conditions, the result will be Y solutions. So maybe you can talk about that.
So beware of the Y solutions, because it's like the similarity between the current state of Western civilization and Weimar Germany, which is libertinism. I don't know what else to call it in a word. And then authoritarian militant solution, which is to be wary of, with that which is offered. That's all. And it's like, I don't think that it's likely to come out that way, but I certainly think nationalist solutions are coming out of this.
Well, nationalists have to, only because we've lost capacity to do otherwise outside of the country, right? We no longer have significant marginal advantage to do anything else. But if you mean in the sense of, so I think it'd be national. The question is, which left national or right national, right? I mean, so what kind of national comes out of it?
Right.
You know, the globalists will still work together, even if America in for the Anglosphere or the Germanosphere can no longer maintain the global order. It doesn't mean the globalists won't work together.
No, I just think that they need to be reined in a bit, which is some limits be placed on their behaviors, which are clearly have caused us undue harm.
Yeah.
And move forward like that. So it's crying out for the pamphlet to be completed, you see.
Yes. So this is I would like to change one thing in the discourse, which is they keep saying us, and it's not us, it's women. And until we get that change in the discourse done, excuse me for brushing my hair in public. I wasn't even
I was going to say something.
I'm
certainly
recording.
Couldn't emulate the behavior.
I'm recording and I'm like, what am I doing? I just act like I'm having what a fucking idiot. Anyway. So
glad you cursed about it.
Yeah, I'm just a fucking idiot. Damn it. Anyway, so anyway, well, I didn't take a shower yet this morning, so my hair's a little, I was like, just stay down, behave yourself. So I'm sitting down there and I'm saying, well, the problem is we keep saying it's us, American. It's not. It's American women. Because if it weren't for the American women voters, we wouldn't have this problem. We wouldn't have any of these issues. It wouldn't have been possible to happen. And that's why
they were baited into the hazard.
Right. Women are easy, and the problem is women are easily baited into hazard. They're much more conformative. They're much more agreeable. They're much more desirous of going with the herd. So, it's like, female intuition is, without extraordinary training and discipline, is hostile to self-governance. So, it's because it's hostile to responsibility, and self-governance is responsibility. So, what the women see it as, I'm demanding this of others. But they don't see it as, we're demanding this of each other. So the problem is women. And so when we talk about this issue, we it's just, what, you're shaking your head at me, and I'm not. This is the hard problem. We've created a hard problem for ourselves.
I'm just pulling out my book here that was written in I'll tell you the exact date, which is the Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of the Witches, written about 1450. And they talk about this. It's like, the question is this, is why do we talk about witches and not warlocks? And they're like, they're just way many more witches. They're the problem.
Yes.
Warlocks are few in number, and they trick the witches into doing their witchy nonsense.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
And the women, and they're talking about it in the vernacular of the moment, which is probably in Latin, but it's like, the issue is the women are more susceptible to misdirection.
Yes. Well, I mean, this goes back to your brilliant insight about language being used for spells, and women are more susceptible to language and spells, right? And so it doesn't mean that, and then we'll get the idiot that gives us the Naxal. Well, not all women. Well, I didn't say all women.
Hey, that was you. We're talking to you. Don't do it.
Jesus, it's like I said, you say women. It's like as if it's a flat line instead of a distribution, right? Right? It's like men, as if it's there's some men that are pretty effeminate in mind, right? And there's some women that are, but if you look at what causes the tilt, it's not right. It's not the margins. It's the mainstream number. So you only need so many people to defect. And if you look at the voting history, enough women are hostile to responsibility, that we're voting over responsibility versus responsibilities. I suppose that's a really profound thing I should say.
Say that again.
Is that women change the political discourse from voting over responsibilities, in other words, which ones, into responsibility in general. Like they're trying to avoid responsibility in a conflict. Well, that's the opposite of self-government. That's saying I want power. It's not saying I want a market. And so how would you train a population to do that? It's actually really easy. You have to stay on track about it, but you have to understand that the men's pursuit of status is self-image, worth, market value, sexual market value, is predicated on his ability to pursue increasing responsibility, right? That's what a status is for a man. It's responsibility for self, others, things, stuff, territory, space, time. Whereas a woman's is predicated on her consumption of the product of other people's responsibilities. And so, which is, why they monkey branch and reproduction. So these reproductive things show up. So can we compensate for it? Well, we can. We can, but, and that's what, I work at, you work at, the team works at, so that we don't have to demonize women in general, but we can guard against the female antisocial behavior that's deleterious to self-government as thoroughly as we guard against the male antisocial behavior that's deleterious to self-government, which of course we do this idea that we have to oversimplify and impose authority, which is the male version, and the female version, we have to oversimplify and impose authority. But the two different things are the women don't want responsibility and the men want to impose responsibility. It's so obvious, you know. I mean, when you get down to the understanding first principles in our work, right? You understand how this is just physics playing out, right? I mean, it's just obvious, right?
It's not their fault, it's their nature.
It's their nature. And so you have to guard against human nature. We have to govern with people we have, not ones we wish we did. And if the ones we have need training to be able to participate in responsibility, we have to give them the training, because, you know, I mean, it's logical to maximize personal consumption while minimizing personal responsibility and accountability, right? I mean, it's purely logical. So just as it's logical to pursue criminality if you don't have to. I mean, it used to be heroic to go steal the women and stuff from the tribe next door. Now it's not, right?
That's right.
So, you know, these things are. So I don't know. I just dished out a bunch of stuff there that's kind of important, but I probably should go down and write down as a series of points of how we should reapproach the question of the age, because we keep talking about the American population as a whole, and it's not the American population as a whole that's a problem. It's the inclusion of women in the polity and the inability of men to counter it.
There's an impotence of the law because it is mute on the subject.
Correct. So in other words, we've empowered the antisocial behavior of the women, but we haven't maintained the power of the socializing of the law. The law.
Government ignores it treats men and women as the same, and they're not, and it's an error. That's the essential error, and it lends itself toward the I think it's a fundamental lie that's being projected, which is they're the same.
Right. So we somewhat acknowledge classes in our houses of government. We certainly acknowledge classes in our legislation, but we're not allowed to acknowledge sexes in the legislation when they're no different. I mean, it's just another class division.
Different classification, yeah.
Right. So I would tend to think of as sexes as laterally and classes as vertically. And if we map that out, you'd probably figure out how easy it is to understand. And then the difference between the classes, the classes is capacity for responsibility, and the difference between the sexes is either pursuit or evasion, right? Because that's part of the reproductive strategies, right, between the sexes. So you end up with a pretty simple grid if you look at the politics with that simple mathematics, which is in the end so painfully obvious.
It's only obvious once you bounce to the bottom.
No, I know, but I mean, it's like a lot of stuff we do that's so exasperating when you figure it out. It's like it's that simple, and what's wrong with us? You know, why are we such idiots?
That's not right, man.
What?
That's not right. It's the it's like, look, it's hard to figure out. You got to get to the bottom of it because you got all your own biases and propensities, and then you just keep bouncing down until you hit the bottom.
Okay, what you're saying is there's a whole lot of chaff and not much wheat in there, and it takes a lot of work to find the wheat, right? I mean,
then you bounce off the bottom and you bounce your way back through, and then you're like, how do I explain this simplicity to everybody that they can understand it?
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, I really like the arc and reverse arc that we've been talking about lately. How it's like you go from embodiment to anthropomorphism across the disciplines to computation, then you work your way back and revisit each of them. It turns out all of them are needed.
That's right.
Right. It turns out all of them are needed, but we need to correct them.
That's right.
why did I not, I thought about it. Because if you look at the first book I wrote on and didn't publish on libertarian, because I didn't want to get positioned as libertarian. In there, I cover all the reforms of all the disciplines, right? I cover that, and it's like, well, why did I think about reforming like mathematics? And why didn't I think about it as reforming incremental pedagogy by means of these, by the means of this moving through the sequence of incredibly, basic human instinct all the way through the most abstract eradication of all human value, human care, concern, or bias, right? Which is calculation. Right? I mean, the universe doesn't give a shit about us, right? We're just here. God might, but the universe doesn't, right? I mean, it's just like, maybe even if we say God, he's like, yeah, well, I'm going to start up 100 to use different civilizations. If one of you makes it, that's fine. The rest of you, it's up to you, right? I mean,
it's all like, just see how the cards fall
right.
out,
It's like,
right?
it's a lot of work. I'm just, if you want to be idiots, go ahead. One of you will make it, right? And if not, I'll just start another one, right? So I need somebody to help me with this mess. And God, dealing with you kids is absolute nonsense, right? I mean, so I don't know. I'm trying to appeal to the deist version of this, but
Right.
anyway, so the universe doesn't give a shit, and so this spectrum, this pedagogical, this discovery pedagogy, some reform. I actually like the way we talk about that because it doesn't discount the importance of fairy tales and myths and theology.
Right, they're very important.
Empiricism and science and computation. It doesn't.
But the issue is this: I call it an error checking, because now you once you get the science, you can reverse flow back to the imprecise and inflated languages and grammars and logics, and you correct the errors that were in there that cause problems.
Yeah, and what you get left is, I think the church should have just claimed victory. I mean, natural law is so fucking clear. I mean, excuse me, I'm cursing a lot today. Why is that? That's because you and I are talking, and I feel I'm in trash talk mode or something. I don't know. I'm in bar talk mode. Anyway, so we're back in here, and you get back and you say, well, these guys, they weren't that far, aside from the selfish interest of the parties involved in mythology, theology, philosophy, there's always some self-interest in this stuff, right? Or sort of folly, bias, self-interest, political necessity, all this other crap that's in there. If you go back, it turns out we actually need that pedagogical arc.
Yeah.
You just can't learn it. You can't go to computation right away. I mean, it'd be great if we were all like, could pretend we were going to be like on Vulcan and, do this, be taught. You can't. You have to gradually get there. And the rate to gradually get there is going to be determined by your own genetic ability to adapt in time, which is some inheritance. And the different, the sort of chaotic way each of us matures a different part of all this up here in some,
right.
idiosyncratic chaos. We eventually all sort of get there by 40, mostly we get there by 40, but we don't develop the same, right? I mean, we don't develop on the same curve, and we don't develop the regions of our brain, and certainly girls and boys develop very differently, and they develop under really opposite circumstances. Putting them together is detrimental to both. It's more detrimental to boys because we have to dumb everything down for girls. Did you see me sneak that in there? Did you see me sneak that in there?
Okay. So you have a towel now. I figured out your towel.
I was just trying to see if I could start something.
No, and it's like this. It's like yeah.
Well, I mean, because boys need physical interaction the way girls need social and interpersonal interaction.
Right, but see, the boys are not tolerated. They don't do well in the school system because it's like intolerant of boys.
Well, it did, when I was, of course, when I was in school, in a boys' school, it was fine, right? Because you operated with similar incentives, but also we had, we had 2 recesses in gym,
Wow,
right? We had gym and 2 recesses.
that's pretty good.
So, you were out there doing something, right? Physical. So it was more like that. And at least for us, we were read to after. Can't remember if it was after gym or after recess or after lunch. I don't know. They read to us. So you have 2 recesses, gym and lunch, right? And then one of the things is after. I think it must have been after lunch. They read to us for an hour, right? So I learned all these books just because the teachers would read to us for an hour. So I mean, I look at that and I'm like, I don't know, if you're a guy, that's enough that's enough oxygenation and exercise to maintain your attention.
Right.
And I love that shit. I mean, my favorite thing, dodgeball, but I mean, I don't give a shit, baseball, softball, dodgeball, that stuff, climbing on the fucking bars,
Right.
You do.
Right.
Back when we were allowed to hurt ourselves, and if you hurt yourself, well, you're a boy. It's like, you're a boy. You can hurt yourself. It's what happens. You break your arm at school. It's not a freaking crisis. It's like boys do that, right?
That's right. It just occurs.
It just occurs. You get it fixed, and you learn not to do that again. And everybody around you learns not to do that again, and you go forward.
That's because the noise is awful.
Well,
the screaming is the screaming.
It's like we were skating, and this kid, because when you're getting into junior high school, some kids started smoking, right? So I think it was a 7th grade. Some kid fell down at when we were skating, ice skating, and he got a cut across his leg that was, it was fucking gory as hell, right? I mean, it was like right in his blood. And he's like, and we're all hovering around him, and I'm thinking, this is pretty good behavior because none of us are in the same clique. We're all still trying to take care of this guy.
Yeah.
Right. I was like, okay, we come together.
One of our guys, he's down.
He's it was the same thing as when I went to boys' school, right? We had our jackets and stuff. He's in a different group. We may not even like each other, but if we're together outside in public, we're got each other.
Right.
It's the gang thing, right? I mean, but it's the positive, it's the sports team version of the gang thing, right? And I just loved all that stuff. You can't do it anymore. You can't have all that, the man stuff and the adversarial stuff and the risk and the reward and the competitive crap. And you wonder why these guys sit around and eating chocolate bars and fast food and getting 300 pounds, It's because it's fucking, sitting still is brain damaging for boys. No, and I'm not saying that as an analogy, I mean, literally brain damaging. Whereas girls can do it. Well, you say I said, no, but it's literally brain damage. It's not me that said that. It's I can't remember her name that did the research on boys and girls that said you're actually developmentally harming these boys. Because if they don't compete, they don't give a shit. Right? If the girls don't socialize, they'll be selfish. If boys don't compete, they'll be selfish. What's the difference between the negative externalities of females and males, right? Females are seditious and men are troublemakers. Right? But you could be troublemaker in a freaking video game now or on the internet instead of in public. Whereas, even back in the 80s when the gang thing was happening because of drugs, right? They converted the basketball gangs into drug gangs, right? That turned it into high violence, right?
Yeah.
So are we saying anything useful here?
No, I think we've completed our arc pretty well.
It's just the arc is, but the completion of the arc is, how are we going to have this conversation? The problem is women. That's a hard conversation to have.
How are we going to have this conversation? And it is like, that's not the right way to frame it, I think, but it's close.
Okay.
So I would frame it like this, is like, the problem is the failure of government to adequately constrain the misbehavior of women in public.
Right.
And so it's not the women's fault. It's their nature. Right. And it is the job of the government to adequately limit their bad behaviors
as equally as they do.
And they're not there. It's feminine behavior, not women's behavior.
Mhm.
So that it's the nature that we are limiting, because its expression in the political sphere is detrimental to our common good.
Yes, because it's always and everywhere an attempt to evade responsibility for self-government instead of bear the burden of shared responsibility for self-government.
So
And
it's
I don't
the
mean
issue.
self-government up here. I mean self-government at every level, from the self
Mhm.
all the way up to the polity.
So the issue is it's not women. I would not mention women at all. I would talk about feminine misbehavior and talk about feminine cognitive biases.
You're not going to get away from it. It's not going to do it.
I'm not trying to get away from it.
No, I mean is
I'm trying to
how do you frame it with the least objectionable way?
the only way to make it unobjectionable is to make it feminine biases are the problem, the expression of feminine misbehavior. And then if pressed, talk about the sexes. You say women represent the bulk of this type of behavior because they represent the bulk of this type of cognition. And there's a gender specificity or gender relationship, but is not deterministic.
Okay, and so the second part is that women tend to vote. Women always demonstrate herd behaviors. They tend to vote more together. The men tend to vote across the political spectrum, which is the libertarian, civic national and nationalist. Yeah.
And so that's only if pressed to ask about the causality associated with this type of misbehavior, because the government shouldn't give a rat's ass about it. The misbehavior is the problem.
Right. So
The
it's
sex of the
we've
person-
licensed. We've not suppressed a misbehavior. The fact that this misbehavior is predominantly female is just part of
It's not here nor there to the law,
right.
because men can commit.
I think that I think that's hard. I know what you're saying. You are correct in what you're saying.
Why no?
All right.
I love working with Curt. He didn't see that coming.
I know you think it. I just didn't see it coming. I'm not sure it creates enough. See, one of the ways I look, of course, you know this from my work, is I try to create a conflict that has to be resolved. In other words, because a conflict that has to be resolved forces a discussion. So I'm actually interested in creating the conflict so that it has to be resolved. So the problem becomes then, what's the venue to create the conflict to be resolved then by presenting the resolution, which is the way you're framing it. You know, I mean, you understand it? If you can't
present it like this. I
conflict generates attention.
I can generate your conflict and resolve it in one sentence. Many people think women are the problem.
Oh, that was brilliant.
When in fact it's not true. It's not women at all. Although it might appear to be, because it's predominantly women that are the problem. Right?
Yeah, but yeah, and then you say, well, it's, you know, we keep talking about this, but with the invention of modernity in England, we've gone through all these counter revolutions against modernity across the world as resistance. When because of that conflict, we got the Industrial Revolution. We elevated classes into power that they didn't have before, and so we watched as the crisis of the classes likewise worked its way across the world. We worked as we then united the world under this system, and we saw that the races and ethnicities counter revolved, became the topic of it rather than states. And then finally, we're here where there are women. The introduction of women is causing this problem across. So there's nothing new here, except more
just
people
variations on the
have
form.
more agency. As we've increased the prosperity, people have more agency for self-expression rather than compromise and what do you call it? Working conformity, right? So what's happened is that this is just a normal process, and what we have to do every time is we encounter these things, and the law lags. Now you can have it done a couple of ways. You can have it done as, I'm not going to change this at all, Islam, right? I'm going to kill a lot of people and change it. So, China and Russia, right? I'm gonna impose it and then manage it, Europe. I'm going to make us aware of it, and we will have to come to consensus on it, America. So it's this whole spectrum of trust in one another, right? The Europeans, we trust each other, so we trust each other to come to the correct conclusion. Otherwise, we'll have a conniption fit called another war, and then we'll solve it. But then we'll resolve it after the war. So, but if you go to the other end of the spectrum, they're like, no, this is not resolvable. God gave us the law; it's immutable; it'll never change. This is the final word, and then you have to just, kill people. So I'm trying to figure out usually when Brad drinks a coffee like that, he's trying to hide a reaction.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, I don't know if that's what was going on that time. And I was trying to say, what did I say that was so reaction that needed a hidden reaction that time? So I'm sitting, he's doing it. I'm questioning myself. So across the spectrum, so we're going through a normal process, which is what I'd kind of like to get across, but I don't know how to have that conversation.
I know what to do.
Okay, hold on. I think you've just proposed a really good way to do it. People think it's women. There's some truth to it, but let's really talk about what the context of what is happening. And so whenever people are given more agency, they have more opportunity for antisocial behavior, right? So when we see more opportunity for social behavior, people see antisocial behavior. Well, I mean, it's one thing when men are continually increasing their behavior, but this is the first time women, well, other than Rome and Sparta, is the first time that women have been able to increase the influence of their behavior. And it turns out that the difference between the masculine and the feminine is the search for responsibility versus the search of evasion of responsibility. It's for self-regulation. So this is just a newer problem we've run into. And it's somewhat related to the lower class problem of the Marxists, but Marxism is feminine. So you see this as a natural evolution of us having to modify our law for the incremental suppression of antisocial behavior. And the demand for responsibility is because that's what was required of self-government, is what Eli called a distributed dictatorship of sovereigns, which is individual responsibility for the private and common. And women don't want it. Doesn't mean they can't be trained into it. Men don't want to punch each other don't want to stop punching each other in the face, but they can. Men don't want to stop having wars, right? We train each other into achieving good, directing aggression to positive means. We can direct women's behavior to positive means. Women are very conformative, more so than men. We just have to put the rules in place that prohibit the bad behavior. And the freaking amazing facility they have with lying. Amazing.
So I would frame it like this. It's like, if we look at it like the problem is, what people think the problem is caused by. Some people blame sex. some people blame race, and some people blame class.
They're all true.
And none of those are wrong. They're just inappropriately framed and imprecisely, or the language, logics, and grammars are inflated in the discussion, and they can be reduced to some scientific basis and then reflected back and talk about it in that way.
All those problems are the historical bias of the dominant male expression in our law, and as these other classes gain access to the agency previously only held by the dominant class of males, they are expressing their own history, bias, etc., in this new way, and we have to incrementally suppress all of those antisocial behaviors, just as we had to incrementally suppress the antisocial behavior now. So what we're really saying is that the pyramid of agency moves down, expands with wealth at the bottom, right? And so that we have to incrementally suppress the natural incentives of people in that hierarchy to act in the interest of themselves at the expense of the overall polity. All right.
The issue is the law has a trouble with it. Because it has to fail before it gets corrected.
Right, and the common law is beneficial in that it excels at incremental suppression, but sometimes it takes a lot of data for it to consolidate into legislation. And whereas once you have authority, you can react more rapidly. Right, this was basically Schmidt's complaint about democracy, is that he was saying you needed to have authority, because the rate at which the German polity was changing was democracy was too slow a force to counter what was happening. In other words, the democratic process is too slow. Well, the democratic process is really good for exploration or incremental movement, but it's actually not really good at
No.
fast. So the way we say this is, if you put a law in place in the West, the polity will rapidly adapt to it. That's great, but you have to get to where you can put the law in place. Whereas other places just say, I don't like this and dictate. So you have basically two different markets. The problem is the authoritarian market tends to produce far worse outcomes, and the other market does. So what we've tried to do is we have tried to produce the natural law, which produces an easy way of legislative judgment for the correction, overcoming both the problem of democracy and overcoming the problem of authority. That's another profundity. I'm on a roll this fucking morning. I don't know what the hell's going on with me this morning.
You are.
I mean, it's just, you know what it is a lot of the time we're trying to solve a nit, some little question, but this is actually the big question everybody cares about.
What's that?
The stuff we're covering today, which is really, why are we here? What's this problem? How can we cure it? Why? And I've been making the same arguments as 2012. It's just a natural progression of inclusion of people as agency increases.
Right, but there's another problem that needs to be addressed here, which we have only hit 3 out of 4. And the fourth one is this: with unconstrained women, feminine cognition biases, okay, they can be led astray, and this grants power to the libertarian corner of the ternary logic or ternary system, because they can bait people into hazard without limitation. Because
you mean liberal, not libertarian, but yeah.
But it's just money.
So you're saying that whole spectrum of libertarian to left can do that, whole series can do it. Yeah, I agree with that, absolutely.
Because they're not properly restrained by the law.
Right, because what does libertarian mean? I'm responsible for my own myself, but I'm not responsible for the commons.
Momentarily responsible. only.
Only responsible in the moment, not over time. Okay.
So I think it's very useful. And it's like, what's funny is I think that what we need to do, since you talk about the church failed, and it's like, yeah, they sort of failed. And it's like, they can still claim victory.
They can, but all their, all their money, all their incentives are from the developing world, right? They've lost enough traction here that we'd almost need to split the church. The way we'd almost have another schism.
What would that look like?
Well, it would look like, the what do you call them? Aquinians versus the traditionalists. And so you would just say that you would try to satisfy European ambitions rather than third world ambitions. In other words, you try to
So it's sort of like the Church of England schism.
Exactly.
The Protestant Reformation. It's just a Reformation, which still claimed the victory.
Right. Okay.
For the church.
I would say that's okay. So, well, yeah. Okay. Well, great way for. Sorry, you're much better choice of words. So you need the equivalent of the Church of England moving over to the natural law with the natural law all the way, and a religion of natural law, which would be responsibility, because really what early Christianity is, it's irresponsibility, right? I'm giving up responsibility to it, and I get mindfulness in exchange for giving away responsibility. But by giving responsibility, I'm also insulated, right? I'm insulated from this pressure. And so and so it's part of the feminine mind, right? So what we want to do is we want to switch it around to insurance in exchange for responsibility, something around those lines. Because Jesus is a hippie,
Okay.
I mean, there are a whole bunch of tropes in Christianity that are right. I mean, it's like, well, is this beyond my control? Yes. Well, that's freaking Stoic. It's not Christian. It's just incorporated, right? Is this beyond my control? I can't do anything about it. This is beyond my influence. Well, it's not I'm influenced by my social behavior in public, but it's beyond my influence to care about, to worry myself over.
Right.
And the Stoics say, like, this church picked up on the Stoic virtues, they made them more effeminate. But it doesn't mean we can't have the same system. So there's nothing wrong with that whole system, other than for some reason, which I can't really grasp, right? Because this isn't like an emotional framework or that I mean, I grew up in the church, but to some degree, I was always a Protestant instead of a Catholic, and I was always a humanist rather than a Protestant, right? I mean, and I was a scientist rather than a humanist, right? I mean, it's one of these things, and it's like, well, so this whole thing looks really good to me. These rituals are really good. I understand all this, right? It really makes me happy as a person, but I can't conceive of this world. So it's hard for me to, as the church, to look at the world in 1800. Or maybe 1860, and look at the world and say, how do we need to reform? I can sort of understand the Vatican II era, and it was just a catastrophe. It went the wrong way. Okay, we're human, we make mistakes. But it's really more, they should have gone to education more.
No, this is not good. That's not good.
No,
the issue is this, your
I can't figure out how why would they get it?
No, this is not the right, this is the church it's like a cognitive thing that is so big that its wheels turn slower than yours do. Okay. It's not capable of generating it doesn't process the signals fast as you think it should. And so it's like this giant whale that has to change direction. And it takes time to change the direction of the battleship, right? And so the issue is, just like the law, it takes generations to figure out the nature of the error that has accumulated, to change the course to fix it. The church is the same kind of a thing, and it can still claim victory. Just took a minute to gather the information after the insult of Darwin.
And the law and the church is feminine, is loyalty is based on the social construction, which is why it's cheaper to use religion than it is to use payment or force or law. That's because the church is really cheap, because all you need for that loyalty is shared social construction.
I know, but here's the rub. You ready for the rub? The rub is the paradigm is allowed to come to fruition after the gravestone.
Yes, I
And
understand.
that's anti-social construction.
Wait a minute, I don't get that leap.
Look here, okay, we got a bunch of daisies that need to pop up because the people there under the daisies can't change because their socially constructed reality prohibits it.
All right, they have so much neural investment in the social construction that they're prohibited from adaptation, which in a religion is valuable because it doesn't require external incentives that are costly. It requires only social incentives, right? So that's it. So there's really very little power to change.
Can't claim victory because then we would have to change.
No wonder religions are such a pain in the ass. So religions are a step function too. So you have to have an extraordinary impetus to change in order to change.
Right.
Right. So, okay. So this is the church failed to run into an extraordinary impetus to change, a solution in how to change, at the rate of change was occurring. And so they were surpassed by a new religion, leftism, Marxism, that pursued this. It was actually the same argument, but in a non-superstitious vote, and it could be pursued by the upper classes, which would create advantage for the lower classes to follow them, which is where you get the feminine minds that may take it, the feminine males that take advantage of the female mind and the feminine mind. Okay, you're correct.
I like watching you do your math, man. It's like I'm watching Curt. He's been making a proof. That's for the audience, right? He's getting his calipers out and he's doing this. He's like,
well, I have to construct things from rational incentives, and so I'm just trying to say, okay, what does do? And it turns out to be that's the correct answer. So it's just too many. You're right, and so my bias is I adapt quickly.
you're fast, man. Super
So,
arcing.
and so I have a difficulty understanding because I make the same mistake others do, as I project that other people in power are the same as me, and they're not. We're not the same. We're not all the same. And so I project my cognitive range on them, and that's just not true. So,
well, no. It's like there could be a guy as fast as you that was the Pope. And he recognized the limits of his people to be able to follow him to the next post.
Right. What
like,
I mean is but that's a guy, right?
Yeah.
That's not like the management team of the church all the way down to the local priest, right? That's a guy, right? Yeah. I mean, Ratzinger was not an idiot, neither was John Paul. I mean, he's a smart fucking guy. It's no question of it. This guy, I think, is
oh my.
This guy's a fucking catastrophe. He needs to die soon.
Oh my.
He really does. He will.
So
So can the church reform? Can we have a schism? Not a negative one, but a positive one. Because we've had a bunch of churches try, right? But what they fail. I wonder why that is. I know why that is. It's because they can't compete for attention. Can't compete. So when you said, when I went to, they needed to go to education, that's what I was meaning. That's what I was meaning, and I think you reversed it, but I don't think I was clear with what I meant by it. Is that the Catholic Church by the Jesuits were MFers, right? They knew what these were smart guys. And so like when I went to a Xaverian order, right? I was educated by Xaverian. But they understood that the Catholic Church understood that it was education.
Yes.
And so that's probably the real problem is the church, the separation of church and state prevented the church from, and the church's speed of change allowed the Marxists to usurp education, which is really what happened. The church lost control of the venue, the very venue that they'd actually created. They lost control of the venue because the incentive to get educated is higher than the incentive to go to church. So that was that. It's that really that simple. It's really it's actually really easy. So the church, I mean, I got a Catholic education is a hell of a good thing. I mean, you notice it in anybody who's had it. It's just nothing like it because you're always saturated in morality. Everything's in a moral context. Even we studied comparative religion, but it was always in this moral context. And you don't realize the Christian moral context is very costly. It's a high cost religion, but it has extraordinary high returns. Right? It has high cost. It doesn't have as high a cost as Stoicism. Stoicism puts more of the burden on you. Christianity lets you share the burden with the social group. Fascinating. This is interesting. Okay, now I understand. I feel like today's a good example of, thank you for giving me the prescription you gave me to get over my infection. But I feel like my brain is back again. I mean, what we did today is more like, I feel more like me than I have since like 2015.
Wow.
It's really weird. It's not good. This whole low level infection thing is fucking wrong. Anyway, sorry. Didn't mean to go to all over the place, but that was a really fascinating subject to get into because I'm just so mad at the church.
Oh no.
And it's like, well, it's like being mad at women. I mean, they're women. I mean, it's a church.
It's like you just
What? Go ahead. You
don't
could
get mad at women. Don't get mad at the church. It's like it's okay. You gotta get over your madness.
I mean, it's like, I don't know. It's sort of my thought process works, I guess. I mean, if when I was looking at look at a company, it would make me angry. In other words, the way it was dysfunctional,
Yeah.
would make me angry. And that in anger would provide the incentive to.
We call that the fuel for the fire.
Exactly. And it's the same thing with all these other problems. Like we're working
Just
on
fuel for the fire.
working on a problem. I get angry about it because
Okay.
right.
Just throw some more coal in the bin, man. Go. We're gonna burn it.
And then I stop being angry. Partly because Brad beats the crap out of me when I'm angry, but otherwise.
That's my methodology.
We got some good clips in this one, Brad.
It was a good one. I think we should break. But first, we should tell the nice people to hit like, hit subscribe, and don't forget the notification bell because it gets lonely too. And then you can leave your comments, glorious comments, and we'll see what happens next.
And thank Brad for his charm, character, good looks, masculine virility and all that stuff. Anyway, love you, brother. We'll stop this recording and we'll start another one for the working session.